Good evening. I'm Jim Zirin. This is The Digital Age. Tonight's show is about our Cold War with China in cyberspace. Recently, and with increased frequency, American interests have been the target of computerized hacking emanating from China. The targets have ranged from military installations to even the United States Chamber of Commerce. The attacks are designed to throttle operations or perhaps to steal intellectual property and trade secrets and conduct espionage. So our question tonight is, what can be done to stop it? Can we talk the Chinese out of it, or must we heighten our defenses? Here with us to help us answer these questions is Adam Segal. Adam Segal is a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. He is an expert on counterterrorism and national security issues. And Adam, we're delighted to have you back with us.
Thanks for having me on again.
Well, now, first, what is hacking? How does it work? I put hacking into Google and I got 75 million hits.
Hacking now has extremely broad meaning. Sometimes it means do it yourself or hacking a program that someone's given you. But in this case, we're talking about illegal penetration of computer networks, either government or private companies.
And how do they go about doing it?
There's many approaches. The one that seems to be used in many of these cases is what's called spear phishing, or sometimes it's called APT, Advanced Persistent Threats. And the way that it works is they tend to scout the organization, perhaps through Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter, other social networks, and figure out who works there, how they're connected to each other, what their ties might be to each other. And then they craft an email. They spoof an email address, so it might look like it's coming from your boss or for somebody within the organization. And they'll send an email that would be very reasonable for you to receive, something about the orders for next week or the agenda for next week's meeting as an attachment, usually a PDF attachment or perhaps a link. And they'll send it to you, and you'll basically open the email and you'll click on it. And once you click on it, it'll download malware, sometimes a keylogger or other things that will begin sending messages back to the hacker, which then allows them to take over your computer.
What is malware?
Malicious software.
Now, it's generally accepted, and it's kind of common ground, that China is responsible for the hacking. How do we know this?
Partly based on some intelligence, partly based on some speculation. So a lot of the attacks come from IP internet addresses in China. That in and of itself is not proof because IP addresses can be spoofed. You can route attacks through several networks, and so you can hide where they come from. But in many of the high-profile cases, especially the ones that tend to be focused at the defense contractors or U.S. intelligence or U.S. political officials, we have both the IP address and then we have other intelligence means. It may be we've overheard phone calls or other things. And then you also have to look at who benefits, right? If someone's going after the plans for U.S. stealth fighters, it's only likely to be several possible targets, and that's probably China or Russia.
Are we talking about the Chinese government or the Chinese military, or are we talking about representatives of Chinese state-owned companies?
That's one of the big questions, is who's directing these, or are they directed, or are they just tolerated? U.S. intelligence officials have suggested within the last several months that there are about 20 groups that are doing most of the high-profile attacks on U.S. defense industries and technology companies, and that these groups have a relationship with and are run by the Chinese government. But we have to imagine that there are, in many cases, there are freelancers, people that are just doing it for financial gain, for criminal reasons. And you have to assume that the relationship is pretty fluid, that hackers kind of go in and out of the state's orbit over time. We've seen cases where the Chinese government has recruited hackers who have come in and provided expertise. We've also seen what are called black hats, kind of hackers that are doing it for criminal reasons become white hats, that is providing security consulting for legitimate reasons.
FBI Chairman Mueller, testifying before Congress, said that cyber attacks will surpass terrorism shortly as the #1 threat to our country.
Yeah.
who have been on the receiving end of these attacks?
So far, it's mostly been defense contractors and U.S. high technology companies, and the threat primarily is towards intellectual property and business strategies and plans. So what we have is a widespread program of industrial espionage, so a threat to our economic security. The issue of, is it going to be a greater threat than terrorism? I think, how do you measure it? Are we talking about scope? I think a scope, clearly, it is already a bigger threat. Right? It's happening at a much broader scale. It's happening all the time. And the number of terrorist attacks that happen on U.S. interest is right now fairly small. But I don't think a cyber attack is likely to have the same destructive capability as a terrorist attack.
Well, suppose they shut down the electrical grid.
Right. So right now, that capability seems primarily to be only state actors. So Russia, China, Israel, the United States, Germany, the United Kingdom are all state actors who seem to have those capabilities. But cyber attacks seem to come in two qualities right now. Either they're very broad and not very sophisticated and have mostly a disruptive capability, right? What we call a kind of a weapon of mass disruption, right? What we think of the DDoS attacks, distributed denial of service attacks. So you overwhelm a website by sending it too many messages and it goes down. That's really just like vandalism. That's what we've seen with Anonymous and LulzSec and a bunch of these other groups. Those are fairly easy to do, and a terrorist organization could organize that. Taking out a power grid is a different set of skills. You have to both understand specific systems that monitor and regulate industrial systems that are often called SCADA systems. SCADA, supervisory control and data analysis systems. And these systems are highly specialized. And often a power grid is not connected to the internet, or at least it shouldn't be connected to the internet. So you have to get the malware into the system through another means. And the systems are often heterogeneous, right? They're not all working on Microsoft Windows, right? They have several systems in place. So to be able to do all those things together is fairly sophisticated. And
would you have to be here in the United States to do it, or could it be done through spoofing and phishing?
No, you could do it from any place in the world. But the skills are fairly narrow, and right now terrorists don't seem to have them, and terrorists don't seem all that interested in it, right? Turning off the power grid doesn't seem to have the same impact as a bomb in the subway would, right? It would cause lots of pictures and lots of very visual displays of terror. Power grid goes out, you could always say, well, it was an accident, we messed up the management, we overloaded the circuits. You could deny that in fact it was a terrorist group. So that capacity now I think is mostly state-based, but it will eventually proliferate and transfer to terrorists.
Now, at the United States Chamber of Commerce not too long ago, someone printed a document and it was in Chinese.
Yeah.
And it appeared the Chinese had hacked into their systems. Why would the Chinese want to hack into the U.S. Chamber of Commerce?
I suspect for several reasons. One, the chamber itself often puts forward policy ideas about trade with China. Chamber officials are probably in close contact with administration officials. And so the hackers would want to know that information. They'd want to be able to tell the Chinese government, look, this is what's coming down the pipe. There's going to be new trade regulation. And they also probably thought that the chamber had information about its members, about their own business strategies. And so they seem to be targeted. But lots of places are now targeted for the possibility of that. Law firms, consulting companies, think tanks are all targeted for the expectation that if it's not that organization itself that has the information, they're probably in contact with people who we want to know about.
Speaking of the Chamber of Commerce attack, former White House counterterrorism advisor Dick Clark recently said that, quote, the Chinese have attacked every major U.S. company, every government agency, and NGOs. They're attacking the Chamber of Commerce as part of a pattern of they're attacking everything in the U.S. If you're working on U.S.-China relations with an NGO, government agency, you can be sure the Chinese are reading your emails and on your computer. Do you think that's an exaggeration?
If it is, it's a widespread one. Dmitry Alperovich, who used to be at McAfee and now is at a small company called CrowdStrike, has phrased basically If you're a Fortune 500, there's two types of Fortune 500 companies, those that have been hacked and those that don't know it yet. So we clearly know that the attacks are broad. There's been widespread reporting that think tanks have been targets, human rights groups have been targets. So I suspect that there is a large N of targets that are out there. Is it every single one? Probably not, but it's pretty big.
Well, just looking at the ones that have been reported, recently RSA, the secure ID company, I know you're familiar with that, which reported a hacking attempt or a successful hacking. Are we just seeing the tip of the iceberg? Are people underreporting for various reasons?
They're definitely underreporting. We know that companies do not like reporting the vulnerabilities. They don't like reporting the breaches. You know, the first case that kind of set us talking about this issue was the Google case, right, in January of 2010. And in that case, the Google said, you know, we were hacked along with 30 others. I think expecting that the other companies would then stand up and say, yes, we were hacked, but Google was the only one that publicly announced it. So there have been lots of reasons why companies don't like talking about it. They're afraid of liability issues. They're afraid customers and clients are going to wonder about their own security, so they have tried to cover it up. But in my view, long term, it's better if we talk about it. That's one of the ways that we can start begin to put pressure on the Chinese government to try to rein this in.
Certainly, media executive Gordon Krovitz in the Wall Street Journal article, and again, the chairman of RSA have said there has to be greater sharing of information between the government and the various corporations that might be subject to attack, and in effect knock down the silos,
right.
was the argument after 9/11. Do you think that would be useful?
It'd clearly be useful. We have a program in place that's called the DIB, the Defense Industrial Base, which was an attempt to help defend the defense sector. That was originally managed by the NSA and the Defense Department, and now has been handed over to DHS, the Department of Homeland Security. And that is based on this idea of information sharing. So what you share what's called a threat signature. What does the malware look like? How can you target it? That has mixed reviews. There has been some positives, but has not been as effective perhaps as we would hope. But information sharing is part of all the legislation that's being considered right now, almost 13 separate bills for improving cybersecurity. The big concern again is how do you get around liability issues, how do you get around anti-monopoly trust. And so there is a huge demand for it. What you hear from the private industry all the time is that when the government says information sharing, what they mean is the private industry telling government what it knows, and not enough sharing.
And that's regulation.
Regulation, just that's how they work, right? That they're expecting the information to come from the private sector. The private sector is complaining that the government is not giving them enough. So there is several bills in Congress right now that will basically force NSA and DHS to share more information with the private sector. It's clear that's an important step. It's not going to be the silver bullet, but it's an important step.
National Security Agency and Department of Homeland Security. Now, Adam, tell us, why is China doing this?
I think there's...
Why the stealing? Why the hacking in to get intellectual property and trade secrets?
There's, I think, three primary reasons. The first is that the Chinese aren't happy being the factory shop floor to the world. They're afraid that they're going to get caught in a technology trap. So while China continues to produce things cheaply, Western companies, Japanese companies own the intellectual property. So the example that the Chinese analyst always uses DVD players, right? 90%, 95% of the world's DVD players are made in China. But the optoelectronic reader, the most technologically advanced part of the DVD, that's owned by Toshiba and Siemens and other companies. So
Japanese companies.
Right. So when they sell that, if you say we buy a DVD player in Best Buy, let's say we buy it for $30, about $4 of that goes to the IPR holders, the intellectual property rights holders. And the rest of it goes to, the very small margins go to the Chinese producers, which there are hundreds of them for DVD. So very, very small margins. So the hope is they'll move up the value chain.
So this is a shift from really a cheap labor economy to a value-based economy.
Exactly. And there is a a huge part of it that is a very legitimate push. The Chinese have increased their spending on R&D. They're turning out more engineers. They have a number of very ambitious science and technology plans.
Well, that's the classic way to do it, to build a better mousetrap.
But the short-term solution seems to be to steal it. So the IPR theft, the cyber hacking, all seems to be a way of trying to break this cycle. And a lot of it comes from the Chinese view that basically that it's unfair, that they've been exploited. The second reason is, from a military point of view, the Chinese still see themselves as the weaker party when they think about potential conflict with the US military. And what the hacking, we know there's a lot of writing in China about if you're going to enter into a conflict with a superior adversary, one of the first things you want to do is knock out their command and control structures. And you want to blind them for information.
This is the art of war.
The art of war. And so when the Chinese look at the US military, they see it's incredibly dependent on networks, computer networks. And so Chinese colonels and other people who write in these journals say, well, one of the first things we want to do is take these networks out in a conflict. And so a lot of the Chinese writing is about how you would take out US military networks. It also kind of reminds the United States that if there were to be a regional conflict, let's say over the Taiwan Straits or the South China Sea that were to escalate, that the US homeland would not be totally safe, right? So to have Chinese hackers who are in the US power grid or other critical infrastructure reminds the United States that if things get out of control, you know, we can make you pay.
Sort of a flexing of muscle.
A deterrent.
Or
right?
a deterrent.
Right, to remind the United States that things might get out of control. And then finally, there's a kind of safety valve that happens, right? You have a huge amount of nationalism on the Chinese web. And what we see is that, especially in cases where the Chinese government has some kind of clash with the US government or the Japanese government or most recently the Vietnamese government, you see a wave of hacking, political hacking, of web defacement and other attacks.
Well, you go back to the Nobel Prize that was awarded in 2010, I guess, to Liu Xiaobo, and it was the empty chair. They wouldn't let him out of prison to accept the Nobel Peace Prize, and then hackers defaced the Nobel website.
Exactly. So you have hacking of the Nobel website. In fact, it goes back to 1999, if not before, with the U.S. bombing of the Chinese embassy in Belgrade, and then the spy plane incident over Hainan. In both those cases, there were massive kind of web defacements that happened.
And you had it even more recently with the dissident artist Ai Weiwei, where they defaced his website.
Defaced his website, and then also went after website change.org, which was hosting a petition for his release. And in fact, actually, in that case, the U.S. government got involved.
The State Department,
State
actually,
Department, yes.
Talked them into ceasing and desisting.
Well, we delivered a démarche that basically said, we want you to stop this behavior. I don't know how successful it was.
Démarche is a diplomatic order.
Yeah.
But does that indicate the possibility of a negotiated détente with the Chinese in cyberspace, or that they're concerned about their foreign relations and what the international community may think of them, so they're going to pull back from what they're doing?
Yeah, it would be a long-term solution. I think the problem right now is that the Chinese see us, the United States, and the West more broadly, as being more vulnerable than they are. Right? Their military, their economy are not as dependent on the web as we are. And so right now, it's very high benefit, very low cost for them to continue. So I don't see it changing in the short term. The other problem, of course, is that we're kind of talking about two different things. The United States often refers to cybersecurity, which is the defense of networks and hardware and computers. The Chinese and the Russians and others will talk about information security, and that has a broader meaning. That involves content, right? Because they're so focused on domestic stability. So for the Chinese, Twitter is as threatening as hacking into the power grid is for us. And so when we try to discuss these issues with China, they talk information security. But the United States is very unlikely to ever stop digital activists, as we call them. The Chinese would call them a hacker, but we would call them a digital activist, someone who's trying to promote the internet freedom agenda. So it's very hard to negotiate over those concerns.
So you have a fundamental difference in policy. The United States position is we should have a free and open internet, so there'll be more democratization and more people with information and informed electorate, if you will.
Right.
And but however, we oppose hacking to the extent it is a criminal interference with the operation of the system.
Right.
The Chinese view is somewhat different. They oppose hacking if it involves, I assume they oppose it if it involves crime or terrorism, but they really want to promote hacking so that they can crack down on dissidents and inhibit free expression.
Yeah, so they have a much more expansive definition of it, which makes it very hard to come up with some larger detente, right? You could, and people have suggested we could find a narrower range of problems we could cooperate on. And crime is the obvious one. We both are victims of crime. The Chinese themselves, hacking is going up. Last year, the Chinese complained of several 100,000 attacks. And so you could say, well, if we could get a narrow definition, something that's clearly illegal in both countries, child porn is one that always comes up.
Well, they're stealing your bank records or bank account.
Phishing or other kind of theft of those things, then you could start there and then build out and get some trust. So I think that's one avenue to discuss.
Was it a problem with China that they always want to control the conversation? I mean, remember they denied that they had an earthquake, they denied they had a train wreck. They tried to crack down on people who were tweeting or Weiboing that there wasn't taking pictures of the train wreck. And it's really an example of that different approach they have toward the internet.
Yeah, you're beginning to see more openness on the Chinese side about these discussions. There were in December of last year, there were massive data leaks in China. Tens of millions of Chinese users had their private information exposed in breaches. So there is now a more willingness to discuss these things openly in China. The problem, though, of course, is when we have traditionally said to the Chinese, there's hacking going on, you need to stop it, there's been sort of 2 or 3 responses. The first is, well, we're a victim too. Look at all the hacking that happens.
So the U.S. is on the offense.
Yes. The second is
we're hacking into their system.
The second is you do the same, right? And we can see all these IP addresses that are coming from U.S. attacks.
Or our surrogates, Japan and South Korea.
And the third is, well, it's illegal in China, so of course it doesn't happen.
Yes.
But they always say yes. The Chinese are consistently basically say the U.S. conducts espionage, and I have no reason to believe that we don't on the cyber front.
We have a cyber
China.
command. We were the first ones to militarize cyberspace.
Exactly. So the Chinese will say, you guys set up cyber command first, so you were the first to militarize cyberspace. We are totally dependent on U.S. companies, right? So Oracle, Microsoft, Cisco, they are the ones who provide the hardware and software for the Chinese internet. And we know that the NSA, the National Security Agency, has backdoors, which would be kind of ways to access our networks. So we're totally penetrated. So don't be lecturing us about what we can or can't be doing.
So how would you solve this problem? Senator Whitehouse, a Democrat of Rhode Island, says you stack all of that up, and I think there's a case to be made. This may be the greatest transfer of wealth through theft and piracy in the history of the world, and we're on the losing end of it.
Right.
So there's the problem. He tees up the problem. What do we do about it?
Well, right now we haven't done very much. We seem to be moving into a strategy of naming and shaming. So we've had more public pronouncements that the Chinese are behind it. So for a long time, U.S. government officials were extremely hesitant of saying it was China, right? You would read a report, we'd say, the U.S. government official would say, oh, it was a state-based actor, and that's all they would say. But we now have Representative Mike Rogers, who's head of the House Intelligence Committee, saying it's China. We had a report from the Office of Counterintelligence that said it's China and Russia. And then we had these leaks to the AP and Wall Street Journal that said it's China and it's these 20 groups. So we're clearly trying to create a public campaign, and reportedly the president and Vice President Biden raised the issue with Xi Jinping in his visit last month.
But Washington. When he was in Washington.
When he was in Washington, yes. So that is part of it, but that's clearly not going to be enough. The issue is really how far we want to push it, given all the other things that we have to deal with China.
What about Xi Jinping? He's going to be the new leader of China, it would appear. He has a very interesting background. His father was imprisoned during the Cultural Revolution. He's said to be a political reformer. Is there much hope that he may cooperate with us in policing cyberspace?
I don't think we have anything in his background to suggest that he will be any more helpful than anyone else. I think one of the questions we have is how much does the Politburo actually know about this hacking? How much do they understand? Do they oversee it? Do they understand the threat to the bilateral relationship? And I think that's one of the things why bringing it up all the time is important. Is you have a sense that that there are people out in the PLA and in the security ministries who are driving these programs, but the central leadership may not fully understand them.
So at the moment, the answer would appear to be heighten our defenses and wait a while and see what happens with the Chinese.
Well, I think, yes, better defending ourselves is clearly an important answer. I think there are probably other ways of raising costs to China. Some of them I hope the U.S. government officials never talk about, right? There probably must be some hacking that the United States can do against the attackers that raise the cost for them. If we can identify—
Hacking against the attackers. We have to wrap up, so I have a question for you. Do you think they'll stop the hacking anytime soon?
I do not think.
You don't think they'll stop anytime soon? Adam Segal, thank you so much. It's been marvelous. Thank you for coming by, and thank you for coming by. Tune in next week for more on the digital age. Please visit our website at www.digitalage.org. For the Digital Age, I'm Jim Zirin. Good night and all the best.